So if you look at this slide, it shows us how vaccines work. Vaccines are, I think, the biggest thing that has happened in the world of virology in as far as protection against viruses is concerned. So what happens is when a weakened form of a germ, okay, a virus is injected into the body has a host of, it has got a very complex way in which it protects itself against microorganisms. So if an infection comes in the first time, it will try and fight that infection, but beyond that, it will create what are called memory cells. It will create what are called antibodies against that antigen, okay, against that enemy, and things that will help it recognize that, oh, we have an enemy, so that if that infection comes back a second time, the body is more than ready to fight it off and clear it within no time. And so that's what vaccines are. They are a weakened form of disease. So scientists will weaken the virus in a certain way so that it does not cause disease per se, but it will still induce that immune response. The body will still be taught to produce those antibodies and lymphocytes and other cells that are important in its fight against the disease, so that when the disease eventually comes, the body is more than ready to actually fight that disease. So you can have live attenuated vaccines, meaning it's almost like the virus itself, except it's the weakened form. Sometimes the virus is killed, and then you just have the antigenic part, meaning the part that wakes up the immune system. You just have that part ensuring that the immune system is built. Sometimes there are toxoids, meaning products of a virus that will still induce an immune system. So the principle remains the same. But at the end of the day, what you are trying to achieve is having a body that is strong and immune against these viruses. And so this next slide shows the Zambian children's card, the one we use in what we call them under 5, what we would call the under 5 clinic in the past. Now we say MCH, okay, mother and child. So in the MCH, they'll give you this under 5 card that in one part will show you all the different vaccines that we give to our children. And these will prevent diseases such as diarrheas, pneumonias, meningitis, as well as hepatitis, okay, and a few other diseases like measles and rubella. It's important for the children to be protected against all these, and we have seen it in our country today that the under 5 mortality rate has gone down, and one of the best reasons why it's reducing every year is because our immunization schedule is improving. It's a good. It has vaccines that are good, that protect our children against all these conditions. Now, how do viruses reproduce? Okay, so the first thing that a virus will do when it realizes that it's in a place where there is conducive environment, there's a living organism that can accept it. It's not any living organism. There are certain organisms that will be hosts to certain viruses and others not to others. Remember, there were different types of viruses, and so if you have an HIV virus, it will require a CD4 positive cell, because the HIV virus has certain glycoproteins on its surface that will relate in a certain way, okay, to the proteins on the surface of the cell. And so once it attaches, it will allow now what is inside of it to actually go inside the cell of the if you realize that I'm pointing, it will go inside the cell of the human being, and then the genetic material will now go into the DNA or whatever it is, the RNA of the human, and cause havoc there. It actually goes and subverts, it overthrows. It tells the human to stop whatever, the human cell to stop whatever it's doing, and the human cell must now follow the marching orders of this virus. So the virus will instruct the genetic material of the human to make more copies of itself, and so the viral copies are formed. The protein copies that are supposed to form the viral capsids are also formed, and then after everything is formed, you have an assembly point where now little virions, small baby viruses, are formed, and then these viruses also now go to the other side of the cell and start the budding process, meaning they start getting part of what is the human cellular covering, okay? And then they get off to go and infect other cells, and then that cell at the end of it actually lyses, meaning the cell bursts open and it dies. So a CD4 cell is a cell that protects us against infection. It's a soldier cell. When you have infected so many soldier cells, and when they actually lyse and die, it means that your immunity is rendered useless. There's nothing that is protecting the human anymore, and that's what we see in HIV. The person has no immunity, and any disease, we call them opportunistic infections, a disease that would not normally infect the human ends up infecting you, because you really have no soldiers, you have no protection, you have no military system to protect you from what is foreign. And so the virus then propagates itself and goes and infects the next person. The next picture also says the same thing, except now this is a bacteriophage infecting a plant cell. So it will attach, it penetrates the cell, it goes to the host DNA and gives the host DNA its matching orders. The host DNA starts reproducing what is viral and not what is for itself as the bacteria. And then eventually there's so much virus that it makes the cell burst open, and all the viruses are released to go and infect the next host. Sometimes instead of the host cell breaking open to release the viruses, the virus can actually tell the host cell to replicate itself. Meanwhile, it has attached itself to each part of that host cell that is replicating. And then when the environment is conducive, you find that all the different cells that are infected will now start producing virus, and then they all die at a certain time. That is what is called the lysogenic process. So sometimes it happens that way. It replicates the host cell before it actually bursts open. The lysogenic process, or the lytic process, is where each cell actually produces viruses and dies before it can reproduce itself.